Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new What If. Today we're going to talk about what would happen if Yamato was an original Straw Hat. Grab your snacks and settle in. The history of the world turns on the smallest of hinges. A single decision, a shift in the wind, or a chance encounter can rewrite the destiny of kings and pirates alike. In the timeline we know, the daughter of the strongest creature in the world waited 20 long years in chains, starving for freedom on the isolated island of Wano. But what if fate grew impatient? What if the shackles of Kaido were not enough to hold back the spirit of Odin? Imagine a world where the Straw Hat Pirates didn't just start with a boy in a barrel, but with a force of nature that could shake the very foundations of the seas from day one. This is the story of how Yamato became the first mate of the future Pirate King. It begins not with a shout, but with the roar of a storm. Yamato, clutching the logbook of Kozuki Odin, made a desperate gamble. She didn't wait for a savior to arrive in Wano. She stole a small supply ship, broke through the violent currents surrounding her prison, and vanished into the gray mist of the ocean. But the sea is cruel to those who navigate by passion alone. Her ship was crushed by storms, and for weeks she drifted on debris. Her explosive handcuffs still locked tight around her wrists, a constant reminder that even if she ran, her father's shadow was never far behind. Fate, however, had a destination in mind. She didn't wash up in the New World. The currents carried her impossibly far, dragging her starving, sun-bleached body to the shores of the weakest sea of them all, the East Blue. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't looking at the factory smoke of Wano, but at a clear, blue sky. And standing over her, poking her horns with intense curiosity, was a boy with a straw hat and a scar under his eye. It was the fateful meeting between Monkey D. Luffy and the self-proclaimed Kozuki Odin. For Luffy, this wasn't a monster, it was just a hungry person. In typical fashion, he offered her food before asking for her name. As Yamato ate with the voracious appetite of a beast, she noticed something. The boy spoke of freedom. He spoke of being the king of the pirates. And when he mentioned his brother Ace, the pieces clicked into place. The fire in Yamato's eyes ignited. This wasn't just a random boy. This was the brother Ace had told her about endlessly. The shackles on her wrists suddenly felt lighter. She wasn't lost. She had found the next chapter of her adventure. She pledged her club, her strength, and her loyalty to him right there on the sand. Luffy, confusingly accepting a crewmate who claimed to be a samurai man despite clearly being a woman, simply laughed. He didn't care about the details. He just liked that she was strong. But there was a catch. Yamato was still wearing the explosive cuffs. She explained that if she left the vicinity of Wano, they were supposed to explode, but they hadn't yet. Perhaps they were faulty, or perhaps the distance was so great the signal failed. Regardless, she couldn't use her full power, or she risked blowing her hands off. She was a dragon in chains, physically restrained, relying only on her brute human strength. And even restrained, Yamato was a catastrophe waiting to happen for the poor pirates of the East Blue. Their first destination was Shellstown. They needed a ship and, according to Luffy, a swordsman he had heard about. The dynamic was immediately different. Usually Luffy is the chaotic element while Kobe panics. Now Kobe was sandwiched between two agents of chaos. Yamato walked through the marine base not with caution, but with the swagger of a shogun. When they found Roronoa Zoro tied to the cross, the swordsman looked up, expecting executioners. Instead, he saw a rubber boy and a woman who stood nearly 9 feet tall, carrying a massive iron club with horns protruding from her hair. Zoro thought the heat stroke was finally making him hallucinate. The interaction was electric. Yamato, obsessed with samurai culture, looked at Zoro with sparkling eyes. She demanded to know his code, his style, his conviction. Zoro, annoyed and dying of thirst, told them to get lost. But when the marine captain's son, Helmeppo, threatened to execute Zoro despite their deal, Yamato didn't wait for Luffy to punch him. She didn't understand the concept of marine authority. To her, a tyrant was a tyrant, whether it was Kaido or a spoiled brat with a bad haircut. She stepped forward, the ground cracking under her sandals, and with a single swing of her club, holding back 90% of her strength, she shattered the statue of Captain Morgan behind them, sending debris raining down like meteorites. The entire marine base froze. This wasn't just a pirate attack, this was a natural disaster. Luffy laughed, delighted by the chaos, and proceeded to retrieve Zoro's swords. But the true shift in the timeline happened when Captain Morgan attacked. In the original story, Luffy and Zoro had to team up to take him down. Here, Yamato saw Morgan's axe hand not as a threat, but as an insult to weaponry. When Morgan swung his axe, Yamato caught the blade with her bare hand, the iron crunching under her grip. She looked the tyrant in the eye and lectured him on the honor of leadership, channeling every lesson Odin had written in his journal. With a casual toss, she threw the Marine captain into his own main tower. Zoro, finally free and holding his swords, stared at her. He realized instantly that his goal of becoming the world's greatest swordsman just got a lot more complicated if people like her existed in the world. He joined the crew not just out of gratitude, but out of sheer curiosity. He needed to know what kind of monsters these two were. As they sailed away on a small boat, the balance of power in the East Blue was shattered. They weren't just a rookie crew anymore. They were a rubber man, a demon princess, and a demon swordsman. Their next stop was Orange Town, controlled by Buggy the Clown. Usually this is where Luffy learns about navigation and meets Nami. But Yamato's presence changed the tone. She didn't understand stealth. When Nami tried to trick them, Yamato praised her cunning, calling it a true ninja tactic, which completely threw Nami off guard. Nami was used to pirates being greedy and stupid, not overwhelmingly strong and strangely supportive. When Buggy fired his buggy ball, a cannonball capable of destroying a row of houses, Yamato didn't dodge. She stepped in front of Luffy and Zoro. Even without her devil fruit transformation, her durability was inherited from the strongest creature alive. She swung her club, the Takaru, and batted the cannonball back at the ship with the precision of a baseball player. The explosion decimated Buggy's crew before the fight even started. Buggy, seeing this horned woman deflect a bomb like it was a toy, felt a primal fear he hadn't felt since his days on Roger's ship. He recognized that aura. It wasn't just strength, it was the haki of a conqueror, even if Yamato wasn't actively using it. The fight was short. Yamato found Buggy's ability to split apart hilarious, poking his floating head and asking if he was a type of yokai. Nami watched from the sidelines, her jaw on the floor. She realized that stealing from these people might be impossible, but sailing with them might be the safest place on the ocean. But a pirate king needs a ship worthy of the title, and a crew needs a sniper. Their search led them to the quiet slopes of Syrup Village, home to a liar named Usopp. In the original tale, Usopp's tall tales of giant goldfish and 8,000 followers were met with skepticism. But Yamato? She was an audience of one who hung on his every word. When Usopp lied about having an army, Yamato looked around with sparkling eyes, asking to be introduced to these brave warriors. She took his stories as warrior's gospel, treating the terrified sniper with the respect due to a shogun. It was the ultimate validation for Usopp, but it also terrified him. He now had to live up to the expectations of an Oni. The villain of this arc, Captain Kuro, prided himself on his intellect and his speed. He was a man who planned to kill his own master, Kaya, to steal her fortune. A betrayal that struck a violent nerve in Yamato. It reminded her too much of Orochi betraying the Kozuki clan. When Kuro unleashed his Shikushi technique, moving so fast he became invisible to the naked eye, Luffy and Zoro prepared for a difficult battle. Yamato simply sighed. To a warrior raised on the battlefield of Onigashima, Kuro's ultimate speed looked like he was moving underwater. She didn't even draw her club. As Kuro reappeared to strike Kaya, Yamato intercepted him with a simple brutal clothesline that nearly decapitated him. The master of the silent step was silenced instantly. The Black Cat pirates didn't flee, they surrendered out of sheer terror. Grateful for saving Kaya, they were gifted the Going Merry. Usopp joined the crew, trembling not just from the adventure ahead, but from the pressure of having a self-proclaimed samurai worship his lies as absolute truth. However, the journey wasn't just about smashing enemies. A quiet moment at sea revealed the depth of Yamato's tragedy. One night, as they looked at the stars, Yamato stared at her wrists. Luffy noticed. He promised her, with that signature grin, that they would find a way to break them off. He didn't know how yet, but he swore he would free her completely. For the first time, Yamato didn't see Odin when she looked at the ocean. She saw the dawn of a new era. She wasn't just impersonating a legend anymore. She was living her own story. But the East Blue was small, and word travels fast. The destruction of Morgan and the humiliation of Buggy sent ripples through the waters. The Straw Hats were heading to the Barity, and the difficulty level was about to spike. Not because of the enemies, but because Yamato's presence was attracting predators far stronger than Don Krieg. The Barity was an anomaly on the open sea, a floating oasis of culinary violence. When the Straw Hats arrived, the ship was already in a state of controlled chaos, but nothing could prepare the fighting cooks for what walked onto their deck. Sanji, the sous chef with a weakness for women, dropped his tray of soup the moment he saw Yamato. She towered over him, her white hair fading into aquamarine and crimson horns framing a face that was both fierce and noble. For Sanji, it was a confusing mixture of fear and absolute devotion. He didn't know whether to serve her a 5-course meal or run for his life. In the end, his instincts won, and he rushed over with hearts in his eyes, offering food to the beautiful Oni princess. completely ignoring the fact that she was carrying a club that weighed more than he did. Yamato, having starved for most of her life in that cave in Wano, looked at the spread of food on the Baratie like it was a treasure greater than the One Piece itself. She didn't have table manners, she had enthusiasm. As she devoured plate after plate, she bonded with Luffy over the simple joy of eating until you couldn't move. But the peace of the restaurant didn't last long. The arrival of the Krieg pirates brought the stench of death and desperation. Don Krieg, the self-proclaimed ruler of the East Blue, dragged his battered galleon alongside the restaurant, demanding food and the ship itself. In the original timeline, Krieg was a formidable threat because of his arsenal of hidden weapons and his Woot steel armor. He was a man who believed that military might equal power, but standing against him now was the daughter of the strongest creature in existence. When Krieg revealed his golden armor, boasting that it was impenetrable, Yamato actually laughed. To her, armor was a crutch for the weak. She had spent her childhood getting thrown into cliffs by a dragon. A sheet of metal meant nothing. When Krieg fired his poison gas bomb, chaos erupted. But instead of panicking, Yamato inhaled deeply, expanded her chest, and with a shout that utilized the advanced breath control of a samurai, she simply blew the gas cloud back toward Krieg's ship. It was a display of raw lung capacity that left the cook stunned. Krieg, enraged, fired his spike spear, a weapon that exploded on impact. Yamato stepped forward, placing herself between the weapon and the restaurant. She didn't dodge. She didn't block with her club. She caught the exploding spearhead with her bare hand. The explosion detonated against her palm, smoke billowing out, covering the deck. Krieg smirked, thinking he had won. But as the smoke cleared, Yamato was standing there, her hand slightly blackened with soot but completely uninjured. The explosive cuffs on her wrist were more dangerous than anything Krieg had in his arsenal. She looked at the pirate admiral with disappointment in her eyes. She told him that a man who relies on tricks instead of his own spirit will never conquer the sea. With a single fluid motion, she swung her club, Takeru, utilizing a technique she had seen her father use. The Thunder Bagua, albeit a restrained, cuff-limited version. The shockwave didn't just hit Krieg, it shattered his golden armor into dust and sent him flying through the air, skipping across the ocean, surfaced like a stone until he vanished over the horizon. The battle that was supposed to be a desperate struggle for the Baratie ended in seconds. The cooks were silent. Zeph, the head chef with the peg leg, stroked his mustache, realizing that the East Blue had just become too small for this crew. Sanji, witnessing this overwhelming strength, felt something shift. He wasn't just joining a pirate crew to find the All Blue, he was joining a crew of monsters. He packed his bags, realizing that if he wanted to protect Nami, he needed to get stronger immediately. But just as the mood turned to celebration, the water turned black. The air grew heavy, and a silence more terrifying than any battle descended on the Baratie. A small coffin-shaped boat drifted toward them, cutting through the wreckage of Krieg's fleet. Dracule Mihawk had arrived. He had come out of boredom, chasing Krieg from the Grand Line, but his golden hawk eyes immediately locked onto two people. First, Roronoa Zoro, whose spirit burned with the desire to challenge him, and second, Yamato. Mihawk paused. He knew the shape of those horns. He knew the design of the rope belt she wore. He recognized the bloodline of Kaido. For the first time in the East Blue, Yamato felt a chill run down her spine. This man was different. He wasn't like Morgan or Buggy or Krieg. He was a true warrior of the sea. Zoro stepped forward, his three swords drawn, trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. Yamato moved to intervene, her protective instinct kicking in. She knew instinctively that Zoro was outmatched. She grasped her club, ready to fight alongside him, but Zoro stopped her. He didn't speak, he just held out an arm. This was his dream, his burden. Yamato hesitated. She remembered Odin's journal, the stories of honor and the duel. She understood. A samurai does not interfere in another warrior's duel, even if it means watching them die. She stepped back, gripping her club so tight the wood creaked, forcing herself to watch. The duel was brutal and short. Mihawk dominated Zoro with a tiny knife, dissecting the difference between their worlds. When Zoro allowed himself to be cut across the chest rather than retreat, earning Mihawk's respect, Yamato's eyes filled with tears. She saw the spirit of Odin in that green-haired swordsman. When Zoro fell into the water and was pulled out, bleeding and unconscious, Yamato was the first one at his side. She looked up at Mihawk, her teeth bared, a low growl escaping her throat. For a second, the world held its breath. The world's strongest swordsman versus the daughter of the strongest creature. Mihawk sheathed his blade, his black sword Yoru resting on his back. He looked at Yamato and spoke calmly. He told her that it was too early for her to bare her fangs at the world. He acknowledged her strength but pointed to her cuffs. He said that a prisoner cannot be a king, and until she broke her own chains, both physical and mental, she would never reach her potential. It was a cryptic warning, but it struck home. Mihawk turned and left, leaving the Straw Hats defeated but alive. The encounter changed the dynamic of the crew. They weren't just playing pirates anymore, they had stared death in the face and survived. But while they were distracted by the warlord, a betrayal had occurred. Nami had stolen the Going Merry. She had taken the ship and fled to the west. In the original story, the crew is confused and angry, but here, Yamato offered a different perspective. She had spent days observing Nami. She told Luffy that Nami didn't look like a thief running away with treasure. She looked like a woman running back to a burning house to save what was left. Yamato recognized the look of someone held hostage by duty because she had worn that look for 20 years. Luffy, sensing the truth in Yamato's words, didn't scream about betrayal. He just adjusted his hat and said, "Let's go get her." They piled into a small boat. Sanji, Zoro, bandaged and barely conscious, Usopp, Luffy, and Yamato. Their destination was Arlong Park. The Fishman pirates claimed to be the superior species, blessed with 10 times the strength of a human. They ruled the island with terror, crushing anyone who opposed them, but they had never met an Oni. They had never dealt with a woman who treated heavy artillery like toys. As the small boat cut through the waves toward Nami's hometown, the hierarchy of the food chain was about to be violently rearranged. Arlong believed he was the shark in the tank, unaware that a dragon was about to dive in. The sun began to set as they approached the island, casting long shadows over the water. Yamato sat at the bow, the wind blowing through her white hair. She looked at her cuffs, then at Luffy, and then at the horizon. She made a silent vow. She wouldn't just be a bystander. If Nami was in chains, Yamato would be the one to break them. The Arlong Park arc was approaching, but this time, the despair of Nami's village would be met not just with a rubber pistol, but with the thunderous wrath of the Yamato. The board was set, and the pieces were moving toward a collision that would echo all the way to the Grand Line. The village of Kokoyasi smelled of tangerines and old blood. When the crew arrived, the air was thick with a silence that screamed of oppression. They didn't march in yelling. They walked through the streets seeing the scars of Arlong's rule. For Yamato, this wasn't just a village, it was a mirror of Wano. She saw the people bowing their heads in fear, the children afraid to laugh, and the shadow of a tyrant looming over everything. It made her blood boil beneath her skin, her grip on her iron club tightening until her knuckles turned white. She realized that the ocean was full of miniature Kaidos, petty kings building castles on the suffering of others. The pivotal moment came outside Arlong Park. Nami, broken and betrayed by Arlong's lies, sat in the dust, stabbing the tattoo of the Arlong pirates on her shoulder. She was trying to carve out her own history with a knife. Luffy stopped her, placing his hat on her head. It is one of the most famous scenes in history, but in this timeline, it carried an extra weight. As Luffy screamed to the heavens that he would help her, Yamato stepped forward. She didn't say a word. She knelt down next to Nami, took a piece of cloth from her kimono, and gently wrapped Nami's bleeding arm. She looked Nami in the eye and whispered that chains aren't made of iron, they are made of fear, and today, they would break both. Then came the walk. The march to Arlong Park is legendary, but imagine the visual now. Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp walking in a line, but flanked by the towering presence of Yamato. Her heavy wooden sandals clacked against the pavement like thunder cracks. The fishmen were partying inside, laughing about their superiority, unaware that the Grim Reapers were knocking at the front gate. When Luffy smashed the gate down, the dust settled to reveal the 5 of them. Arlong, lounging on his throne, looked down with a sneer. He started his usual speech about how fishmen are the superior evolution, blessed by the sea with strength 10 times that of a human. Yamato stepped to the front before Luffy could even speak. She looked at the shark man and laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. She asked him if he truly believed biology determined the ruler. Arlong, offended, lunged at her, his jagged nose darting forward like a spear. Yamato didn't move her feet. She leaned her head to the side, letting the nose graze her cheek, and then grabbed Arlong by the face with one hand. The size difference was negligible. Her grip was like a vice. She slammed him into the concrete, cracking the entire foundation of the park. She told him that she was the son of a dragon, born of the strongest blood in the world, and yet she chose to follow a rubber human. She explained that strength isn't about scales or gills, it's about the weight of the soul you carry. The battle that followed was chaotic. While Zoro and Sanji handled the officers, Luffy and Yamato turned their attention to the building itself. Luffy fought Arlong, but Yamato went for the map room. She found the room at the top of the tower, filled with maps Nami had been forced to draw for 8 years. To Yamato, this room was a prison cell. It was the cave she had been thrown into as a child. With a roar of pure catharsis, she didn't just smash the desk, she swung her club into the load-bearing pillars of the tower. She destroyed the walls, the maps, the pens, the very concept of Nami slavery. When Luffy finally stomped Arlong through the floors, he didn't just hit the ground. He fell into a pile of rubble that Yamato had already created. The park didn't just collapse, it was erased. As the dust settled and the villagers cheered, Nami looked at the wreckage. She saw her papers, fluttering in the wind, destroyed. Yamato stood amidst the ruins, covered in dust, grinning. She told Nami that the navigation was now up to her choice, not her chains. Nami cried, not out of sadness, but out of relief so profound it felt like drowning. She formally joined the crew, not as a thief, but as a navigator. But actions have consequences. The destruction of the strongest crew in the East Blue, combined with the earlier defeat of Don Krieg and the humiliation of the Marines, drew the attention of the world government. A few days later, a seagull dropped a stack of newspapers onto the Going Merry. The first bounties had arrived. Luffy, as the captain, received his standard 30 million berries, a staggering amount for a rookie. But there was a second poster. The Marines couldn't ignore the woman who had caught cannonballs and smashed buildings. They didn't know her name, so they named her after her appearance. The poster read, Oni Princess, dead or alive, 45 million berries. The crew stared at the poster. Yamato had a higher bounty than the captain. Instead of being jealous, Luffy laughed until he cried, boasting that his vice-captain was famous. Yamato, however, stared at the picture. For the first time in her life, she had a price on her head that wasn't put there by her father. It was a validation of her existence as a pirate. But in the distant new world, on the island of Onigashima, a drunken Kaido would eventually see that poster. The implications were terrifying, but for now, the East Blue celebrated. Their final stop was Logtown, the city of the beginning and the end. This was where Gold Roger died. Yamato walked the streets with a sense of reverence. She wanted to see the execution platform where the Great Pirate Era began. But the town was guarded by Captain Smoker, a man made of smoke who had never let a pirate escape. When Smoker confronted them in the town square, things went differently. Usually Dragon saves Luffy from Smoker, but here, Yamato engaged Smoker first. Her club passed right through his smoke body, useless without haki. It was a harsh lesson. Physical strength meant nothing against a Logia type. For the first time, Yamato felt helpless in a fight. It was a wake-up call that the Grand Line would be full of monsters with abilities that defied logic. When the storm broke and Dragon appeared to save them, clutching Luffy's shoulder, Yamato felt that oppressive haki again, the same pressure she felt from her father. She realized the world was vast, filled with titans she hadn't even met yet. They scrambled back to the ship, the wind at their backs. They launched the Going Merry down the steep canal, heading toward the reverse mountain. As they approached the entrance to the Grand Line, the crew performed their barrel ceremony. Sanji put his foot up for the all blue, Zoro for the greatest swordsman, Nami for the world map, Usopp to be a brave warrior, Luffy to be pirate king. And then Yamato placed her foot on the barrel. She shouted at the top of her lungs that she would become Kozuki Oden and experience the greatest adventure the world has ever seen. The barrel smashed and the ship plunged into the dark currents of the Red Line. The East Blue was behind them. Ahead lay the Grand Line, a sea where common sense went to die.